So I want to wrap up the lamp project, and I think some of the major details that I'm missing, the obvious one is the bell housing for the top of the lamp that's going to actually hold the light. And so I think that's one of the main features that are missing. So it seems like an appropriate time to jump in and solve that problem. So I'm going to create a freehand spline, and once I have my spline, I'm going to do a quick lathe to create that bell-shaped housing at the top. So whenever we generate splines, we want to make sure, particularly the ones that we're going to draw, any of the orange-based splines, I'm going to use freehand. We always want to do this in the front viewport. That'll make sure that things are registered properly and not showing up in a very strange spot. And remember, lathe operates by default around the y-axis, and so I'll use that as the place with which my bell housing is going to be lathed. So I'll introduce a lathe object and throw my spline into it, and that's the rough shape that I want. It might be, you know, a little big, but I can always tweak that later. That's the wonderful thing about modeling this way. So I think the scale feels a little bit big, and I'll tweak that in just a moment, but I think the big issue that I have is when I select the lathe NURBS. When I go into the model mode of the tool, its registration point is way down at the origin of the 3D space, which isn't a terrible thing, but I really want to use this pivot point as the place at which this lamp rotates around. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the lathe object, and I'm going to grab the scale tool. I'll just scale that down just a little bit so that lamp is just about the right scale, and that looks about right. I'll go back to the move tool. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the enable axis, and that will allow me to quickly move the axis without moving the object itself, and I'll make sure I toggle that off. And so now I have this registration point, or the axis point for the lathe object. That's the place at which this will rotate around. Now I'll rotate this in just a minute. Maybe I'll move this up and out of the way, and I still want to kind of tweak that dome just a little bit. But I'll do that in just a few moments. What I really want to think about now is how the lamp is going to attach to the top of this bracket. And so what I'll do is I'll just mock up a couple of quick shapes, and I'll start with a cylinder. And again, at this point, this is really kind of your own design solution at this point. You know, we really want to kind of think about the object. My preference is that you don't follow up with the same exact design that I'm presenting. At this point, you should start to experiment and create some variation on your lamp. What I'm going to do is I have this cylinder, and I'm going to change its orientation, and I could rotate this, but another quick way to change which direction the cylinder is pointing is by choosing in the object manager, choosing the orientation, and currently it's Y+. So the surface of the cylinder, the top of the cylinder, is pointing up the Y-axis, and if I change that to Z+, it effectively rotates the cylinder. I'll use these little control points here just to quickly modify this, and that's about the shape that I'm going for. Tap the S key to zoom in here. And remember, I'm thinking about the way that this thing is built, and so anytime I have a screw, that screw is there for a reason, and that'll act as my pivot point. So let me just jump into my front view here, tap the S key, and so what I can do is I just want to make sure that this stuff is kind of making sense and lining up in an appropriate way. So I got a screw running through that bracket. It's attaching to this this cylinder object now. At least that's the concept. And maybe I'll use another cylinder here, and I'll lift that up. And again, I'm just really kind of making some real quick design decisions. I can always go back and modify this to have it make more sense. But I'm basically just building a real simple device that will suggest an attachment point for my lamp. So I'm going to take these two, and I'm going to group it, and I'll just simply call this, it's a top pin until I figure out a better name for it. I'll take the lathe object, which is the bell housing here, and now I'll start to rotate this a little bit. So when I rotate this, I want to pay attention to what my orientation is, and I really kind of like looking back through the default orientation, so I'm looking down the Z axis. And what I'll do is I'll just rotate this by Z. I'm holding down the Shift key, and I'm watching that heads-up display to snap to the 90-degree increments. Excuse me, 10-degree increments. So I'm going to move that over, and I'll just kind of keep moving this around and get this thing lined up so that it attaches. And then I'll pay special attention at this point to what all the rotation points are and what the hierarchy is here. So I'm going to slide this lamp down so that it crosses paths with that pin cylinder, but what I don't want to do is I don't want to be able to look into it and see that pin coming all the way through. It's okay if it pops through a little bit, but I'll just kind of make these decisions on the fly, and again, I can always go back and continue to tweak this. So that looks pretty good. Now what I'll do is I'll take all this stuff and I'll group that together. So I got the pin and this lamp, and maybe, you know, I want a little bit more control over this, but I think for now this will work. And I'll call this the bell housing. And that group, I'm going to move its axis point. So when I rotate all this stuff, I want it to rotate around that screw right here. So I'm just moving the axis point. I'm not moving that entire group. I just toggled the axis point on. I'll turn it off. And so now, when I grab the rotation tool and I rotate that around, all that stuff makes sense. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I'll probably throw a light switch on the back of this object. Okay, or maybe I'll put a light switch down here on the base. I haven't decided yet, but that's just a design decision that I'll make later. To wrap up this lamp, and I will continue to tweak this offline, but to wrap up this lamp, the thing that I really want next is to actually throw a light into the equation. Now, in order to do this, I'll give this a quick render. This is what my lamp looks like. Again, I still have a lot of decisions to make and some tweaks to make, but what I want to do is I want to introduce a new light source. And the kind of light that I'm going to introduce is a spotlight. And a spotlight is a little bit different than the other lights that we've looked at in that it has a specific direction. And I'll just pull this spotlight up and away. And you can see that this spotlight is by default pointing down Z. It has a light cone that we can control. And so we can make some real quick decisions about what direction this light is pointing in. This is going to be the perfect light to stick up inside of our lamp. Now, this light, I obviously am going to want this to be nested inside our bell, our light bell. And what I'll do is I'll just select that light, and because it's now a child of the bell housing, what I should be able to do is zero out the coordinates, and that should get it pretty close. Well, it's set it to the axis point that we're rotating around. So I'll just move it up a little bit. I'll move it over a little bit, and obviously I want to rotate it. So I'll just rotate this, and holding down the shift key, we'll get it to snap to 10-degree increments. So now I have a light pointing out of my lamp here. I'll go back to the move tool, and because it's a child of this bell, if I go to rotate, I can rotate that whole thing around. And of course I can bend the arms. We've tested that before in the previous presentation. But now I have a light shooting out of my lamp. So I'm going to get this whole lamp object. I'm going to take this thing. I'm going to group it. I'll call this lamp. I'll continue to tweak it. Again, I add an extension cord and some other things. But this lamp, I think, is ready to be thrown into my desk scene. So I'll just take this lamp. I'll give it a quick paste, and obviously that feels just a little big compared to the rest of the table. So I'll just go to the scale tool, and out here in the negative space, I'll just click and drag to the left and scale that down. Back to the move tool and just kind of start sliding this thing around. I'll move it off to the side. That looks pretty good. And so I'll just do a real quick pose with my lamp. I'll go inside my lamp. I'll grab the lower arm. I'll grab rotate, and I'll just give that a quick rotation, and you can see that obviously I didn't have my hierarchy set up right. Probably because I didn't save this for my last presentation. So the upper arm needs to go into the lower arm. There we go. And that bell housing needs to go in the upper arm, and that should be the proper hierarchy. So I'll go to the lower arm now and test this really quickly. There we go. You can see as I point that down, I'm starting to get the light on the table. If I can find my upper arm here, I'll give that a quick bend as well. And even though the hierarchy is right, I didn't change. I must not have saved from the previous presentation. I think I just closed and something happened. That's all right. I'll fix it real quick. So I'll go back to, I have the upper arm selected, and you can see what's happening here is I never moved that rotation point. So I'll just jump in and look at this from the side view very quickly. I want the rotation of that upper arm to be right at that screw there that I put in there. So I'll toggle that use axis tool, back to move. I'll back up a little bit, so I have the upper arm selected, and I'll give that a quick rotation. I think what I'll do is I'll bend that quite a bit. I'll go back to the lower arm, and I'll kind of bend this back that way. I'll take the lamp housing, and I'll pick that up this way. And again, so I'll just kind of keep flipping this thing around, and I'll keep posing it until I get the rough position. Now I'm not gonna overthink this part of it. I just want to see what this looks like inside the scene as it starts to cast some light. So I think that looks pretty good. So the only thing left to do, I think, with my lamp is I will want to throw in some textures and create an extension cord and do some other things. And I'll definitely want to make another pass and kind of refine some of the clunkier elements that I have. But for now, I think I got the nuts and bolts of my lamp to work the right way. It's casting light inside the scene because I have a spotlight in it. Now, I'm not going to use that as the primary illumination. Because I've introduced one single light source into my scene, the rest of my lights have been turned off, so my modeling lights have been turned off, so I just need to, I'll throw a temporary work light into the equation. I'll take that intensity way down, and so now you can start to see that I have a scene coming together. So my light source is in my lamp. There's some other things that I'll do to take a closer look at the lights, but for now we'll call my lamp almost done. I got the main features done. I want to move on and talk about some of the other elements on the table. So we'll start to get into modeling an apple and a coffee mug and some other odds and ends, but we'll do that in the next presentation.